Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Tell No Lies by Lyndee Walker. Narrated by Cris Dukehart. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a vanity tossed to and fro of them that seek death. Proverbs, chapter 21, verse 6. King James Version. 1. It takes more force than most people think to remove a human head. A man of average size and strength who is inexperienced with the beheading process would likely take 5 or more swings, even with a sharp axe, especially if the victim was upright rather than prone. The secret is in the propulsion and in the blade itself. A run-of-the-mill hardware store axe with its convex curve is a poor choice of weapon. Anyone who's ever wrenched a shoulder on a knot trying to split logs knows hitting a dense structure causes the chopping blade to recoil, impeding the task and even injuring the executioner. A blade that's too thick can't be sharpened enough to get the job done, but enough width is required to allow a wide, slow taper to a razor-thin edge. Live targets pose strategic challenges because their movements must be anticipated and accounted for in the approach. He knew all of this. He'd done his homework. He'd built his weapon. He ran a cloth carefully up one side of the double-ended scythe, both blades angled at a perfect 48 degrees. The steel gleamed in the light. His muscles were well-conditioned, his mind clear. He had a message to send, and the weapon balanced perfectly in his hands would carry it. 82 pounds of force. That was the magic number. The weight of a guillotine blade, falling at 21 feet per second. Cliché as it sounded, it really was all in the wrist. He had to spin for velocity on the approach, but it was straightening his arm at the precise right instant and flicking his wrist, just enough to send the angled blade cleanly through the spinal cord and vertebrae that elevated death to art. He opened the door. The stench of urine burned his nostrils. The wide eyes, inches above the thick layer of silver tape, staring at him with equal parts terror and pleading. The condemned scooted backward, his legs flailing, his shoulders still pushing against 2 walls when there was nowhere left to go. It's time. The executioner grabbed the collar of a shirt, so filthy he couldn't tell what color it was. The detail not important enough to stay with him over the past few days. Hauled to his feet and thrown toward the door, the man stumbled head first outside with a sickening crack. Running to the door, the executioner looked down, shaking his head at the angle of the condemned's neck, the dead man's glassy eyes staring up at nothing. Years of work and study had gone into a weapon of attack, and it would be reduced to the boring, sloppy level of surgery on a cadaver. Nothing more than a practice round. He clicked his tongue as he jumped down, landing neatly beside the body. No matter. The blades would still cut. The executioner would have his trophy. He slid the toe of one boot under a limp shoulder, rolling his victim over. The skin of the neck stretched almost comically before the head snapped over, open eyes staring into the sand. The wood of the handle was warm in the executioner's hands as he raised his weapon to strike. 2. Has a medical examiner been here yet? I squatted in shallow water 2 yards from a corpse, a bead of sweat running from my ponytail down the back of my neck before it seeped into the starched collar of my white button-down. The local JP is in Hawaii this week on his 3rd honeymoon, and the closest Emmy is in San Antonio. Drew Ratcliffe tipped his wide-brimmed Stetson back and shrugged from his perch atop a palomino gelding. The horse had wide, knowing eyes, and the kind of fearless streak necessary for police work, easily balancing in the slippery mud of the partially exposed river bottom while ignoring the rotting human parts sticking out of the water. I put in a call for assistance Thursday, but I haven't heard back. They're buried in a turf war among 3 street gangs. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in with the camera, studying the image on the screen. One arm was missing entirely, the hunks of flesh hanging on around the remaining wrist and ankles, gouged away in deep trenches, bone gleaming grayish-white in the voids. The skull was nearly devoid of tissue, as was the chest wall peeking through the tattered shirt. The whole mess was stuck between mud and wood in a narrow, low spot under a fallen tree limb, water lapping at the fabric of what probably used to be faded jeans, part of a Nike logo visible on the lone exposed sneaker. I could tell the body had been underwater a while, but I needed an expert to determine the difference between a week and a month. My Laredo boots sank into the muck of the riverbed, my stomach recoiling at the smell, wafting off the remains in the nearly non-existent breeze, even through the menthol gel slathered on my upper lip. Bear County won't call back. I'll get my guy from Travis to come down. This unfortunate soul has been out here a while. Another day won't hurt. I squinted, looking up at a silhouette of Ratcliffe and his horse, outlined against the kind of clear, wide sky that gets photographed for travel magazines and brings people to the Texas desert. Was the medallion here? I pointed to a yellow evidence marker slightly embedded in the mud, about a foot closer to the remains than I was.
It was. I didn't want to chance anything happening to it before you could get a look at it, so I marked the spot and took it back to the office.
You have a perimeter secured? I asked. He waved one hand and the horse took a step to the side.
As much as I can out here. In theory, my whole life is supposed to be about securing that perimeter there.
He pointed to the opposite bank of the Rio Grande.
But in practice, I know folks who really want in will find a way in.
He pointed to the canyon a few football fields upstream along the Pecos, which met the Rio Grande in a Y shape, just yards from where the corpse was stuck.
The state park starts there, so we called in Parks and Wildlife for assistance, but they have limited ability to help out in their busy season.
Busy season. I picked a wide circle through mud and puddles, my eyes scanning the ground for anything that might not belong. I noted and photographed 2 sets of boot prints that weren't mine, though at least one of them might have belonged to Radcliffe. I held a pen up in one side of a hoof print and snapped a few close-ups of it for depth reference. Does anyone actually camp out here in the Devil's Armpit in August? The confluence of the 2 rivers and surrounding desert was beautiful country, but the relentless sun seemed hell-bent on destroying everything it grazed, the mercury soaring past 100 degrees before 8 in the morning.
The kind of people who have RVs with air conditioning do.
Radcliffe laughed, loosening his hold on the reins so the horse could dip his head to drink from a puddle. Not even then, I said, especially not in this drought. How many days is this for y'all?
359. We broke the record last week,
he said, clucking softly to the horse and nodding in the direction of the ranger's command station, double-wide parked a few hundred yards downstream, amid the cactus, yucca, and grasses lining the riverbank on the Texas side.
Speaking of this heat, let's get out of it for a minute.
And away from the smell, I added, moving carefully to walk alongside the horse where he could see me. He's beautiful. What's his name?
Dodger,
Ratcliffe said.
He's bred from a line of Ranger service animals. They say his great-great-great-great something grandfather was Frank Hamer's mount 100 years ago, so I guess working out here's in his blood.
I stepped out of the riverbed onto the sand of the bank, moving to one side to allow the horse an easier path. Radcliffe, a decorated 10-year veteran with the Rangers' border intelligence team, had emailed me late the day before with a photo of a prayer medallion he'd found sunken in river mud near a set of human remains. His message referencing an old case of mine he'd come across searching files.
I read up on the case you worked with, medallion guy,
Radcliffe said.
7 victims, all women, all found with a medallion on their person somewhere.
All found with only a medallion on their person, I corrected. And Jerry Burkett was executed 2 years ago for those murders, so whatever happened here, I know he didn't have anything to do with it. The truth was that bodies along the border, especially in the river, weren't uncommon. Along some stretches out here, the rate ran as high as 1 a day when the river was high. Officers in this part of the state didn't usually call for help from homicide when one turned up, though the peculiar wear pattern on the flesh and the expensive sneakers had me thinking this wasn't your average drowned wannabe American either. Whatever insight Radcliffe was hoping to get from my work on the Burkett case was bound to disappoint him, but I'd made the trip anyway. Partly because I was curious about why he'd asked me to come, since Google could have told him in half a second that the state of Texas had put Burkett to death, and partly because I didn't have anything better to do with my weekend. The heat choked off any desire for further conversation as we hiked through the hard-packed, clay-mixed sand just off the bank. I mentally cataloged the body parts I'd seen above water and wondered about my chances of actually getting Jim Prescott to drive all the way out here on a summer Sunday. We were friends, but there was a limit to what even friends could ask. I needed a strategy, though, because I needed Jim's sharp eyes and decades of experience if we were going to figure out who the dead guy was and how he ended up stuck under that log. In front of the trailer that served as headquarters for his one-man unit, Radcliffe swung down out of the saddle and led the horse to a 2-stall stable, hastily constructed going by the gaps between the siding boards and the shiny new tin roof. He plunked a large block of ice into Dodger's water bucket, checking to make sure the horse had hay before he turned on a fan, shut the door, and waved me into the trailer. The first blast of AC was so welcome I sighed.
I forget that some folks don't have to work out in the heat all day,
Radcliffe said, shutting the door and gesturing to a worn gray cloth and faux wood chair that was probably older than me before he opened the fridge and tossed me a bottle of water.
After a while, you don't notice it as much.
He opened another bottle and drank half in a single gulp, the red Ozarka label crackling under his fingers as the plastic shrank away from it.
Thank you for driving down.
Always glad to help out where I can. I put my empty water bottle on the edge of his desk and crossed my legs at the knee. The office was small and sparse but tidy, his desk neat, from the 4 black pens in the Ranger's coffee cup to the stack of 14 perfectly aligned file folders on the corner nearest me. I sat back in the chair, fixing Radcliffe with a flat-faced gaze, and waiting for him to tell me why I was there. He played with the bottle, peeling the label off in long strips.
Have you really cleared every homicide case you've ever worked?
I'm more persistent than most people, that's all. I studied him for a second. Why did you really ask me to come down here? He sighed.
My story about the medal didn't fool you?
Google knows Burkett's long dead, I said. But you've got my attention, if that was your goal. And I'm pretty stubborn when it comes to finding murderers. What I don't understand is why that's what you think you've got here. Ratcliffe put the empty water bottle on the desk.
Ma'am, right now I'm praying to every god who might listen that you are the most stubborn person ever born. I can track a smuggler with the best of them. But everything I know about homicide came to me in 2 weeks of training under a guy who had never actually been at a murder scene. Which means it ain't much. The feds want to pretend these bodies aren't stacking up, but that don't make it true. And letting murderers run unchecked out here seems like a bad idea.
Bodies? I leaned forward. How many bodies?
By my count, he's an even half dozen since last September and the second one this summer.
How can you be sure they were all murdered? I asked.
The first 5 were missing their heads when I found them.
That would do it, sure.
And then this guy.
He waved one arm in the general direction of the river, widening his eyes as he closed one hand around his opposite wrist, was weighted down and thrown in the river. I finished for him. The gouged flesh at the wrists and ankles wouldn't have given way just because he was tied up. It was ripped by something heavy. Something heavy that wasn't out there anymore from what I'd seen. I tapped one finger on the desk. You have an ID for any of the victims? He shook his head.
The feds really didn't seem interested. They sent a couple guys out, but they didn't do much but look around and mutter about illegals. To my knowledge, they were all officially counted as crossing casualties.
With how much investigation? He raised both hands.
None that I know of.
Why? That's solidly in a gray area for lying on a report.
You're the murder whisperer, McClellan, you tell me.
The border was a special jurisdiction with its own dangers and challenges. But Radcliffe was more than a little bothered by these corpses, or he wouldn't have called me. There were a lot of things in my world I couldn't control at the moment, but I could solve these murders. I'll need all the information you have on every one of them. The words left my lips on a shiver of unease that had nothing to do with the AC. Falsifying a report was a serious offense, which meant these victims weren't random corpses.
It's not a lot, but it's all here.
He passed me a file folder that was way too emaciated to give me much of anything worthwhile, about 6 dead bodies. I flipped it open anyway, studying a black and white still of a headless corpse in a Prada shirt, a gaudy pin hanging from torn fabric over his chest. Was this real gold? Do you remember? I asked.
Looked like it, but I doubt anyone took it to a jeweler.
A random bandit interested in money would have stolen it, though. I flipped past the photo to a single-page report on the remains discovery, written by Radcliffe. Bare bones was a generous term for the information it held.
You can figure this out, right?
Radcliffe said.
I'm not here to kill your perfect record.
I don't give a damn about the record, I never have. I closed the file and tapped it on the desk as I stood and handed him a card. I'm at the Cherry Lane Motel outside Duncan if you think of anything else, and I'll be back out tomorrow with a coroner. Just try to make sure nobody messes with the scene before we get here. Where were the other remains taken?
To the Bexar County ME's office. But if they have victims coming in from a gang war,
then they're at a storage space and it's been months. These people probably aren't still there, but I'll check anyway. I nodded when he thanked me again as I stepped back outside, wondering what kind of situation it takes for 5 beheaded corpses to just slide under radar. My truck cruising toward the nearest motel, which was 43 miles back toward civilization, I dialed Jim Prescott to ask for his help. Someone in a position of power didn't want anyone else nosing around this case, and Jim and I had experience walking this particular tightrope. I just wasn't sure he'd be willing to step onto it again, even for me. 3.
It's Sunday, McClellan. Are newlyweds supposed to be more interested in each other than they are in dead people?
Jim didn't bother with hello when he picked up the phone, his words wrapped in the kind of weary resignation that stung a little. How do you know I'm calling you about dead people? I stared down the road, stretching flat and straight as far as I could see, the heat throwing shimmers off it in dancing waves.
When do you call me about anything else?
He didn't sound mad, but he didn't sound friendly either. He hadn't in months. And while I couldn't blame him for being frustrated, I didn't know what to say to make him feel better either. I'd nearly been killed in the line of duty a dozen times in as many years, but Jim didn't sign up for a job that carried that kind of hazard. He was still a little too far from retirement to be mad at his job, so I was catching the brunt of it. I could take that for a friend, for a while anyway. And to be fair, I was calling to ask him a favor. Not today, I'm afraid, I said. I have a water-bloated corpse revealed by the drought, I think. Looks like someone sunk him to the bottom of the Pecos, just up from the juncture with the Rio Grande. On purpose.
Dumped in the river at the border.
Jim's tone changed as he considered that, the puzzle pulling his thoughts away from his frustration. Our guy down here says there are more victims, 5 of them beheaded. Interesting cases were Jim's reason for getting up in the morning.
Organized crime?
He mused.
The cartels are pretty famous for beheading people.
It's good theater when you're trying to keep criminals from stealing from you, I agreed. But I'm not making any assumptions yet. The MO itself is common knowledge. It would be a hell of a way to throw suspicion if the killer wasn't cartel too.
Either way, not exactly a safe investigation,
Jim said. I know, I said, but we can have the remains delivered to your lab. The new security there makes Huntsville look easy to break into and out of. The legislature had approved emergency security updates to every medical examiner's office in the state after Jim was attacked back in March. Because if our MEs started quitting en masse, we'd be up to our eyeballs in dead bodies pretty quick, with no way to find the evidence needed to catch killers. Nobody wanted that, least of all the governor in the summer of an election year.
Can we do that quietly?
He asked. As quietly as we can in this line of work. He sat for long enough that I looked down to see if the call was still connected. It was. I stayed quiet.
Okay.
Can you come check out the scene tomorrow? Just this one. Because they just found him and I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. And their JP is in Hawaii.
You can't call Bachman down in San Antonio. He's closer.
Gang war. He's drowning in gunshot vicks.
Jim sighed. I'll come down, but just for the morning.
Thank you. I put every bit of warmth I could muster into the words. He sighed again.
I know none of this was your fault.
I'm just glad you're okay, Jim. Take all the time you need. See you in the morning. I'll text you the address of the local luxury accommodations just in case.
I'm sure they're the very best 1971 had to offer.
There's not even a hairdryer.
I'll see you and your wet hair in the morning, Faith.
Looking forward to it. And for the first time in months, I was. I needed a problem I could solve and a villain I could catch. Radcliffe's dead people would do.
Are you coming over to watch the game today?
Archie Baxter's low drawl sounded positively blissful, putting a smile on my face for the first time all day. It's preseason, it's not a real game. I said,
It's football and it's on the TV. I'm not at work for the first Sunday in a month, and I've got a pot of vegetarian chili on the stove.
Tempting as that does actually sound, I'm down in Terrell County with what appears to be a body dump and a border unit officer who says they've had a whole string of murders out here, and the feds are turning a blind eye.
I worked the border unit 1,000 years ago,
Archie said.
What's your gut saying about the guy you talked to?
Like, do I think he's shady? I asked.
Several were back in my day.
He said.
A whole lot of valuable things cross that border every day. It takes a sort of blind allegiance to justice to be immune to the temptation down there.
Common red flags?
Same ones as always, really. Secrecy is never good. There is a wholehearted embrace of the whole Lone Ranger caricature. Mistrust of fellow officers is often caused by a guy's own guilt.
He said.
And piles of cash are always a reliable sign something's happening that shouldn't be.
Every time, in my experience. I said, my thoughts going to Radcliffe's one-man show and his dismissive attitude about the local sheriff and whatever federal agency he'd been dealing with. Fan-goddamn-tastic. But if Radcliffe was on the take, why would he have called me for help?
Anything I can do from here with very limited time?
Archie asked.
Any other summer, I'd hop in the truck and come help you, but I am buried up to my ears right now.
I know. I really wish you could tell me why, but I'm glad you're home today. I paused. He didn't fill the silence with case details. I'm set, I said. Jim is coming down in the morning to look at the scene, and I've ridden this horse before, but thank you.
Of course.
His turn for a pause.
Jim is coming out there?
6 suspicious corpses total, and our guy swears the feds are ignoring them. I think Jim's curiosity got the better of him.
That would be a hard one to stay away from.
His words sounded slightly strained. Did that mean my case sounded more interesting than his top-secret one? Enjoy your day off, Arch. Give Ruth my love.
She's at the spa until just before kickoff,
he said.
Like she's not beautiful enough, but I'll tell her. You take care of yourself. I don't want you getting too far into this without a partner.
I'm not alone, I said. The border unit guy is here.
Just make sure you can trust him.
I appreciate the heads up. I clicked the call off and turned onto another long, dust-laden stretch of highway, turning the radio up and singing along with Robert Earl Keen about a small-town dealer and a cocktail waitress who got in over their heads with big-time criminals. Time to figure out just what kind of party Ratcliffe had invited me into. The Cherry Lane Motel sported a neon sign with a pair of cherries that resembled certain human anatomy so closely even I noticed, and Graham would have made a joke about it before he could stop himself. I laughed as I killed the engine outside room 17, imagining what he'd have said. Running a finger over my wedding band, I sent up a silent prayer for his safety and hopped out of the truck, strolling slowly toward the office, sweat beading in new spots with every step. The motel was the kind of run-down a place got with time. The wood decking covered walkway and wood-framed screen doors, as typical of the late 1950s, as the patterned carpet and black-and-white rabbit-ear-topped TVs in the guest rooms. It was clean and owned by the same family for 2 generations, according to the small talk I'd made with a teenager who'd checked me in 4 hours ago. The last part was what interested me. A family who'd owned this business this close to the border for so many years would know who came and went from the area frequently, and which local bad guys might lop someone's head off for crossing them. I spotted an older woman with gray hair so long and full it spilled out every side of the wide-brimmed sun hat she had tried to contain it with, as she knelt weeding a flower bed that skirted the far front edge of the building. I walked a little faster until I found a spot in the shade a few feet from her. "Good morning." I let the words hang for a minute, waiting for her to reply before I said anything else. A simple response to a friendly greeting is a good way to get an early read on a person. "When you get to be my age, they're all good, as long as you wake up, sugar." She brushed her hands off and sat back on her folded legs, squinting up at me from under the brim of the hat. I saw her eyes widen the way most people's did when they lit on my badge. "Oh, what can I do for you, Ranger?" "Call me Faith," I said, putting out a hand that she shook with a firmer grip than I would have expected from a woman of her age and size. I waited for her to offer her name. "Doris Duchesne," she said, fanning her face. "The damned summers get hotter every year, hand to God." I nodded, tugging my button down away from my damp skin. Not that letting the oven-roasted air run over it really did me any good. "Miss Doris, I wonder if I could trouble you for a glass of ice water and a little information." "I can do better than that." She stood in a motion more fluid than I could manage myself, removing her gardening gloves. "I've got a pitcher of fresh lemonade around to the house. Though I can't promise the kind of information you need, I'm happy to share whatever I know that might be useful to you." "You've got yourself some company," I said. She waved for me to walk with her, rounding the back of the motel to a sprawling ranch-style home of the same era. A metal TV antenna poking up off the roof, and 3 cars in various states of disassembly, scattered around the yard amid small beds of gladiolas, hibiscus, and roses that would make even Ruth McClellan gasp, especially in this climate. "My husband." She waved a hand at the cars. "Keeps him happier than a mistress would, so I try to see them as decorative. I'll put Christmas lights on that one." She pointed to a Trans Am with a rusted front quarter panel and colorful lights wrapping the mirrors and vacant spaces where the T-tops should be. "Last November. And he hasn't ever taken them off." "He fixes them up to sell?" I couldn't help noticing the lack of license plates on the cars. While they didn't have to be registered if they were inoperable, selling cars with no plates to the wrong kind of people was probably a lucrative trade for the mechanically inclined around here, which might be good for me to poke into a little further, given the alarming number of headless dead people Radcliffe had seen in the past year. "These days he piddles with them when he feels like being outside." She opened the front door and I stepped in, the door closing quickly behind us. "Have to keep the bought air in here as we can. This place has enough leaks to strain spaghetti." She led me through a living room with plastic-covered sofas and chairs, to a kitchen with a gorgeous triple oven range and fire engine red that I'd bet was original vintage.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?